Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, and we're working through the first week of September, the second week of Penn State's 2025 football schedule. We spent a lot of time the last couple episodes breaking down our first look at the Nittany Lions through 60 minutes of game action from a 46-11 victory over Nevada last Saturday inside Beaver Stadium. We had our post-game podcast up late Saturday night, Daniel Gallen and I, from inside Beaver Stadium with the bright lights shining. And then on Monday, coming out of James Franklin's press conference, and this is what we'll bring you our first episode of each week, every week. Monday afternoon, we had Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen join me to discuss a little bit more from that matchup and really a lot from James Franklin's first press conference of the week. We'll get James again later here on a Wednesday after Penn State practice. We're on the practice field again every single Wednesday throughout the season. So check out our coverage at lions247.com. We'll have practice notebooks, photo galleries, video highlights from the field as well. And this is also the time of year where we're going to be kind of laser focused on some absences and what that might mean for the depth chart moving ahead to each matchup. We're going to get into Penn State's Game 2 opponent in just a little while here on the episode. Florida International comes to town. It's the second consecutive week where the Nittany Lions are favored by more than 40 points from a betting angle, which means it's the second consecutive week where you've got an opponent coming to town and trying to make a program statement and put itself on the national radar. So we'll learn more about FIU. They're under new leadership. They've got a lot of new players involved on their roster, similar to what we talked about last week with the transfer portal. But we'll break that down in just a little while. First things first, though, we're going to try our best to get a weekly look at Nittany Lions recruiting development. And considering we're in between two home games, there's plenty to discuss right now with recruiting insider Tyler Calvaruso. Let's bring him on. Tyler, always good to get you on the podcast. And you just informed me you're going to be joining us in the press box in a couple weeks for the Villanova game, making your Beaver Stadium game debut. You've covered camps in Beaver Stadium. You do a great job talking to all these prospects after they leave Beaver Stadium. But it'll be fun to be working side by side. We'll get there when we get there. And I guess you'll have to maybe do the post-game podcast with me that week because you're chipping in with Daniel Gallen off to a wedding. But let's focus on this first week because there's plenty to discuss what's happened, what could happen. And let's look back to begin. What do we need to know about the recruiting advantages that were potentially gained from game one?
It was a solid weekend all in all because we spent a lot of the offseason talking about, whiteout, Oregon, that's going to be the one, the first three games, they're going to be whatever. But it was a pretty healthy contingent of high-level prospects in State College on Saturday. Some guys who were really high on the board at their respective positions. I mean, guys like Mekhi Brown, who's one of the top edge rushers in the nation. Raylon Henry, one of the top cornerbacks in the nation. He was on campus. There were a bunch of talented, offered 2028 recruits. In 27, going back to that, Olu from St. Peter's Prep, the offensive tackle, who's an elite high-level prospect. He was on campus. So it was a strong visitors list for a home opener during a weekend where, frankly, there were several larger recruiting draws elsewhere. Ohio State, Texas, Bama, Florida State, Clemson, LSU. It was still a pretty solid group when some guys could have went elsewhere. And I think Penn State helped itself with a few of its top guys, especially a guy like Raylon Henry, because, he's already locked in to come back for the whiteout now. Getting him to campus in the first place this fall, it was an important step for the staff, and now you've got him coming back for a second visit. So it's little things like that you take away from this past weekend as overwhelmingly positives. It wasn't some needle-moving recruiting weekend. It wasn't some, amazing recruiting weekend. It was what it was. It was a solid weekend. Penn State did well with the guys who were in town. Now, and we say it often when it comes to these fall visits, it's kind of about laying the groundwork for what comes next. You saw it with a guy like Henry who's going to be coming back. You want to keep getting guys like Mekhi Brown back to campus, and hosting them for productive visits like Saturday goes a long way in making that happen.
Yeah, you want to show recruits, regardless of who you're playing, that you can get the ball in the end zone. You can put points on the board. They scored points on their first 9 possessions. You want to show defenders that you're pretty darn good at keeping other teams out of the end zone. They didn't give up a touchdown until the third stringers, second stringers were involved in the final minute of that game. And ultimately, from a weather standpoint, doesn't get much better than what we experienced here in State College last Saturday. So that's going to make a nice impression on players. And we already talked about in a couple earlier episodes, the environment held up. We wondered what it might look like and feel like in Beaver Stadium through all this renovation. It's a project that's going to go on for a couple more years. And like we said on the podcast earlier this week, really, it was everything you'd expect the Penn State game to be from a setting standpoint. And so that's going to check off the list for recruiters as well. You mentioned Henry as a notable name from that first weekend of visitors. Give us another name or two that you think Penn State helped helped itself with last Saturday?
Mekhi Brown, definitely. He was made to feel like a priority during his return to camp. Penn State pulled the trigger on an offer in him with June. It was a June workout that really led to an offer. And Brown, yeah, I said it when we previewed it during the week. He's still really just coming to his own as a pass rusher. I mean, he started out focusing on wide receiver, making an impact on the offensive side of the ball. He's around 6'7", 215. He's focused on rushing the opposing quarterback now, and Penn State loves his upside coming off the edge. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that we talk about a lot with that 27 edge board moving forward, because he's kind of skyrocketed it up. And there's definitely a lot of, I'd say, mutual interest here. Brown recruiting is still, it's not new to him, but I think the word is going to get out on Mekhi Brown as the fall progresses, because, he's playing in Connecticut, New England. It's coming on strong on the high school football scene, but some programs, they're still coming around. And Brown, he picked up an offer from Florida recently, so I think he's going to become a true national level guy, and we'll see how that makes the recruitment. But Penn State is in a good spot early. They're in a good spot with a couple other guys in 28 as well. I know 28 is really far off. I get it, and some people probably don't want to hear it, but we got to talk about it because it rolls around sooner than you'd anticipate. Cam Toomey from New York State. It was his third visit in as many months, because he visited twice during June, camped twice during June, attended Lash Bash, made it back for the opener. He loves Penn State. He's kind of like Brown, where his recruitment, I think the word's going to start getting out, because exposure in New York State, it's not exactly like playing in one of the more prominent regional states or down in a football powerhouse. You got to break through a little bit. Cam Toomey's in the process of that. He's got Penn State, Syracuse in on him now. Nittany Lions high on the list. And then Tyson Swan. He's a top 50 defensive lineman out of Maryland. Really, really intriguing prospect. I think he's going to be a really good player at the next level. I dove into his film on Friday when he shot me a message that he was making the trip, because we have him highly ranked. I hadn't really did a deep dive into the film yet, but that kid's going to be a really good player, and I think Penn State sees that, and they're going to prioritize him as such. He says he has Penn State in his top 6 early. That's always encouraging, again, with the caveat that it's early, but Tyson Swan's a guy to know in 28, and so is Cam Toomey.
I know some people tune out on the 28 references, though. Mekhi Brown, 27, number 1 player in Connecticut. I know you referenced the New England status of his recruitment. He's in Greenwich, Connecticut, which I know pretty well because my wife's from that area. It's very much more so New York City metropolitan, North Jersey, and that kind of area. Going to have a lot of traffic coming through. It's not hard to find him there in Greenwich, and you see the offer list starting to really build out. And I'm really curious what it looks like for Brown when he gets maybe 3 or 4 games of film out there across the Power 4 conference world, and what may happen next. But Penn State, well situated, has him on campus, and so nice foundation with one of the region's top players in the 27 cycle. Tyler, from an on-field perspective, there's guys out there who are playing and making their college debuts that you covered since they were high school sophomores, high school juniors, and key targets for the Nittany Lions along the way. That process is behind them now. They're trying to burn red shirts. They're trying to find a role on a national championship contender. You got a long look at several of them, just like we did last Saturday. What are your biggest takeaways from our initial look at that freshman group?
A lot of it was what I initially expected, I would say. I don't think anyone kind of shied away from the moment of taking the field in week 1. I think those guys who did make it out there, they were prepared, and I think they did their job. Chaz Coleman, I wanted to get into him a little bit because the hype it's definitely real, but I think I still have some questions about the stuff that we discussed ahead of his, fall camp surge. He's still kind of raw. I think everyone in State College knows that, and he's still developing as a pass rusher. And I think there were instances where he kind of still relied on his raw physical traits instead of his developing pass rush moves. And, that kind of led him to a point where, look, you're going up against group of 5 offensive tackles now. It's a different kind of ball game. So I think it's still going to be a little bit of an adjustment for him. I think he's on the right trajectory for sure, but I do wonder if, he has to get a little bit stronger, just a little bit more fine-tuned before he can really take that next step. I think it's going to be a step that he takes probably sooner rather than later in his collegiate career, but I wonder when exactly it will occur. And I'm very excited to watch him throughout this season, because I think as the year goes on, he's going to be one of those guys, kind of like Max Granville last year. He gets better and better as the year goes on, and we know he has a role, but I think the role could definitely get larger as he continues in his development. And it wasn't just the true freshmen that I was keeping an eye on either. Those redshirt freshmen that I got the chance to cover really closely as well. Guys like Antoine Belgrave-Shorter on the back end of the secondary. Ethan Grunkemeyer got his real meaningful snaps at quarterback. So I was frankly encouraged by everything that I saw. I was wondering going in if some guys, might take them a few plays or a few throws to get into the real swing of things, but I think everyone did their job quite well. So if you're a Penn State fan, we spend a lot of time talking about, hey, look, these are the future, these recruiting classes are the future of the program. And it's encouraging to see these guys go out and tackle things the way they need to be tackled in week one. Darius Dixon, he's another one. We raved about him throughout fall camp, about how ready that he was compared to some of his counterparts. And you saw it. He went out there. He looked right at home playing on that Beaver Stadium field. So I think a really encouraging weekend overall for the young guys. And it wouldn't shock me if I have similar feedback coming away from the next 2 weekends as well, because you're going to have plenty of opportunities to get these young guys out there and get them valuable experience. And it's all going to pay off in the end. It all pays dividends because these guys, they say it time and time again. The more meaningful game snaps they can get in situations like this, the better off they are in the long run.
James Franklin was asked on Monday during his press conference who flashed to him in terms of that fourth quarter when we saw a lot of different pieces on the field. And he referenced one freshman in that answer, Darius Dixon. Yes. And Dixon, we saw it show up on the field. It wasn't just getting the work at defense, and he got significant work in the defensive backfield late in the game, but he was a special teams factor. And that was part of the reason why he was cleared for a green light really before preseason camp. It felt like it. He was going to be a day one ready type guy. And so Darius Dixon, I think that was reflected. Like you said, we saw Chaz Coleman. We talked about that earlier in the podcast. One guy we didn't talk a ton about earlier this week that I wanted to bring to you because you covered him pretty closely, Owen Alasine, hasn't been one of the first names out of our mouths when we're talking about freshmen on the field. But with the left tackle situation where Drew Shelton's played a ton of football, they're going to get him to the sideline when they can later in these matchups. And Egan Boyer was projected as the primary backup left tackle, we could probably say this year. Although I think in a pinch, you may see Nolan Rucci move to the left side and some scrambling happen if they had to really reshuffle their starting group. But in terms of who's next up in a game, it has turned into Owen Alasine entering this year because Egan Boyer has been working through some stuff, recovering from an injury setback. He's up to 300 pounds from 238 when he enrolled. A lot of people are high on him, but right now he's on the sideline. And Alasine is out there playing 20-plus snaps at left tackle. I'm reminded that he was on the field helping protect Drew Aller in the blue-white game during the only touchdown drive that Drew Aller led that day in April. And Alasine has been someone that has seemingly been ahead of the curve of where we kind of projected him all year long. The feedback in the spring was strong, and to see him now well-positioned not to just play a non-conference action, he'll probably come away, 50 to 75 snaps from this non-conference schedule, I'd imagine. But he's also looking like someone who's going to be on the plane, on the travel roster when this team has to pack up and go on the road in Big Ten play. So remind us a little bit of Owen Alasine's prospect profile and some feedback maybe you've heard from within team facilities about why he's in a spot to go out there and get serious reps as a first-year lineman. Not an easy task.
No, it's not. He's a really fluid kid going back to his prep career at Avon Old Farms in Connecticut. And, he was always billed as a higher level athlete, former hockey player, just a kid who moves well all around. And I think going into his college career, we discussed quite often, how quickly could he take to the physical aspect of it, the strength and conditioning program, the adjustment to playing against Big Ten competition. I think that's all why he's in the position that he's in right now. And it's maybe seems a little bit fast tracked from a guy who we had circled as a little bit on the raw side coming out, but it doesn't surprise me because he took to football really quickly after putting hockey behind him and focusing on playing tackle for Avon Old Farms. He took to everything really, really quickly, and he became a high-level power forward prospect really, really quickly. So it doesn't shock me that he's always been labeled as extremely coachable. So it doesn't shock me that he's been able to get to Penn State, pick up what Phil Trotwood's been laying down, take that coaching, translate it to production on the practice field and now in games as well. So, yeah, I definitely agree with the assessment that I think, we talk a lot about this O-line depth, and then there are guys like Owen Alasine waiting in the wings who, hard-pressed, if you put him out there, I think they could give you some really quality snaps.
Yeah, Alasine got work on the left side. You saw redshirt freshman Garrett Sexton getting work on the right side. He's another guy who's really made physical strides over the last few years of his career. Former 200-pound high school quarterback, now 300-plus pound offensive tackle. And one other name to mention here, we talked about Darius Dixon at cornerback. Jameer Joseph, who you and I have both been very high on, talking about him as a guy who could potentially shed his red shirt. He was out there for 20-plus snaps in his college debut. You saw 4 freshman-eligible defensive backs over 20 snaps in the season opener. Dixon and Joseph, the freshman cornerbacks, and then also redshirt freshman Kenny Wosley getting the start in the nickel position, and redshirt freshman Antoine Belgrave-Shorter getting the start at safety. Tyler, before we turn our attention towards FIU and understanding a little bit more about what the Panthers will bring to campus this Saturday, tell us what we need to know about the recruiting scene this Saturday. Again, not going to be as robust as the whiteout matchup later in the month with Oregon coming to town in a primetime game. That's going to be a recruiting spectacle. But what do we need to know going into this weekend?
Yeah, not even as robust as the opener, but there's still some storylines. 5-star running back Kamon Spell told me he's going to be making it back to campus. That's his plan for this upcoming weekend. And then really beyond that, it's a heavy commit weekend. But Tavion Branch, former Rutgers defensive line commit, Pennsylvania kid, he's backed off his pledge to the Scarlet Knights, and now he's going to be taking an official visit beginning Friday. So that's a storyline I think Penn State fans should follow really, really closely. I think that Penn State is in a spot, maybe get that one done a little bit sooner rather than later. It's definitely one that, in speaking with people familiar with the recruitment and the way things have gone with Branch, he really wanted to get to Penn State for this visit. It's part of the reason why he decided to back off his Rutgers commitment. He didn't want to take it as a Rutgers commit. Now he's back on the market. He's going to be at Penn State for this OV. I mean, I think the Nittany Lions have a chance to make a really, really strong impression. He's always held a really high opinion of the program. He's going to get around Deion Barnes and the staff for multiple days, which I think will be crucial in this recruitment because Penn State didn't start recruiting Tavion Branch as a defensive lineman until a little bit later in the process. So there are still conversations that need to be had. And when I talked to Branch at Under Armour, New Jersey in May, he liked what Penn State was saying on the D-line, but again, it was still a little bit newer compared to some of the other programs. Now it's not new at all. I think Penn State's got a really good chance to make a move here. And if Branch does go a little bit further with his recruitment and decides, move on a little bit elsewhere, give some other programs a chance to work their way in, Florida's one to watch. He could take a visit down there, and Auburn might be able to receive a visit as well. But I think Penn State's in a spot to really make a strong impression and maybe get this one done.
We'll see if he's adjusting his plan of playing the Big Ten and it leads to State College. This weekend should prove pivotal to that process. And I just want to circle back on one more thing with you. You mentioned Kamon Spell. Kind of nonchalantly you mentioned it, that he'll be back on campus. He's coming off a visit watching Ohio State in Columbus beat the number 1 team in America. He remains a Penn State commit. He remains the number 1 running back recruit in the country. And he had a fantastic season debut, which we discussed here on the podcast a week or so ago. How important is it for him to be circling back into Beaver Stadium? And what do you view as the mission of the Nittany Lions staff while he is on campus?
Mission-wise, probably just, settle things down a little bit. Remind him why he picked Penn State in the first place. Remind him why, he has felt Penn State is his future home for a while now. And just really reinforce that his relationship with Stan Drayton is heading in the right direction, because it is. It's been a really good relationship between those two. And I think Kamon Spell sees the developmental aspect of and the benefit of playing for a guy like Stan Drayton, who has that track record of developing elite-level running backs and getting them to the NFL. Spell said coming off the Ohio State visit that, getting out there and going to Columbus and visiting meant nothing because he's still coming to Penn State. You could take that for what it is because he's still getting out and checking out other programs, but it's huge to get him back, because he's planning on coming back for the whiteout as well. I believe that's still intact and on his schedule. So that would be 2 trips to Penn State in September. And that's big because a lot of the talk with Kamon Spell recently has been, where's he visiting besides Penn State? Because he is going to get out and take some trips. But the more you get him back, it's the same deal as kind of an uncommitted recruit, but it's different. It's a different angle because Kamon Spell is committed. But the more you get him back, the better off you are, because you just get to strengthen those relationships and solidify the things that need to be solidified. And I think with Kamon Spell going to campus this weekend, it's a big chance for the Penn State staff in a little bit of a toned down setting, because, the whiteout, it's going to be a spectacle. The 100+ kids, it's going to be huge. This weekend's a little bit different. It's a little bit more intimate. So I think there's value in that as well.
We will find out. We'll be there. And as usual, Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan and company will have you filled up with feedback coming out of this game regarding the recruiting world. We had a bunch of stuff on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday from this first game and the prospects and what they experienced and where Penn State helped themselves. It's all VIP content, and hopefully you're enjoying that. If you didn't cash in on that 75% deal we had going on in August, good news for you, 60% going on right now So still a soft landing into the Lions 24/7 community. If you want to jump on board now, that's going on for a few more days here in game week number 2, 60% off. Get everything that Tyler's throwing your way from a recruiting standpoint, everything we're bringing you from the practice field, and everything that we're hearing from inside team facilities all season long. Tyler, always appreciate your perspective on the dynamics of Nittany Lions recruiting. We'll get with you again soon, but first we got to shift toward Penn State's next opponent.
Yeah, man, appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
All right, take care.
Yep.
As promised, we got to talk about FIU now as the non-conference schedule continues. Second straight week where Penn State's going to walk into Beaver Stadium, considered a 40-plus point favorite. They didn't quite cover that margin last Saturday, but we know that they were well in control of that game, establishing a 27-3 lead at halftime. FIU also comes to town fresh off a blowout. We'll talk about their week 1 performance, what we learned about the Panthers, and what kind of challenges they could potentially present Penn State now as we bring in one of their beat reporters. Kevin Barral is kind enough to join our show here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Kevin, first off, thanks for making time for us as a stranger. We appreciate that. And second off, really appreciate your coverage. I've had a chance to review it in recent days, getting ourselves a little bit more equipped to cover this matchup. And you do great work covering FIU.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I know recently you were in the Sports Illustrated network. Now you've got your own Substack going. So if you have a desire to learn a little bit more about FIU, it's Kevin, last name Barral, and he'll have you covered on FIU. Obviously, we're all here about FIU this week, Kevin. And can you talk us through what you saw through their first 60 minutes of action this season?
Yeah, so they faced Bethune-Cookman, an FCS team, not a great team. So I think a lot of it really has to be taken with a grain of salt. But one thing that they certainly did was rely on the run. And they ran for 223 yards, which is the most since their game in 2023 against North Texas. So it's been a while since they really found to establish a run. And they really did that, 6 rushing touchdowns in total, which tied a program record. I don't think that'll be the case in week 2, unfortunately. But really, they were able to open up the passing game, which is something that FIU relied on heavily last year, a lot on that passing game. You had Eric Rivers, you had a Chris Mitchell the last 2 years. You had that guy, and now, it's a lot more spreading out the ball. It's the first time in program history that 13 different players recorded at least 1 reception in the game. So it certainly shows that they spread it out the ball quite a bit. There's not going to be your main guy to break the FIU record for a third straight year of receiving yards in a single season. So I think the big thing to take away certainly is that FIU established a run. Their defense is going to be, causing a lot of havoc. And I know that's one of the big things that's been going on in college sports, those havoc points or whatever you want to call them. So FIU did a really good job of doing that, stopping the run. That definitely a bigger challenge now coming up. But I think it's the first time in a very long time that, you kind of left that game with a sigh of relief. FIU in years past under the last staff really struggled to beat FCS opponents, dominate FCS opponents from start to finish. You look at Monmouth last season, they lost to Monmouth. They only won by 2 against Maine. You had to win in, I think, triple overtime against Bryant. So FIU going in there with a 42-9 win, first time since 2019. They don't allow a touchdown. Certainly a sigh of relief, shows that, all right, FIU could dominate the teams that they need to. And I think you'll see, obviously it won't be the same case against probably one of the best teams in college football, number 2 team in the poll in Penn State. But I think they'll definitely keep it close, at least through maybe the first quarter or 2. And it'll certainly be an interesting case here for FIU, as they've been in Big Ten country before. They played power conference opponents pretty well for some reason, and they keep it close at least up until the half.
Yeah, last year, a trip to Indiana for the Big Ten, for the opener, I believe, last season, a 31-7 loss up there in Bloomington. FIU, like Penn State, kind of ran away from their opponent early in the matchup last Saturday, up 28-6 at halftime against Bethune-Cookman. Ended up winning that game 42-9, covering a spread of 26.5. And that was the head coaching debut at FIU for Willie Simmons. He's had experience as a head coach before, Florida A&M, Prairie View A&M. So he's looking to take the next step in his career. He most recently was working for Manny Diaz, who these coaches know well because he was defensive coordinator here not too long ago. James Franklin spoke highly of him, thinks he's going to do a good job, thinks he's a good fit for FIU. Thus far, what is kind of the vision that you're seeing, and what is the definition of this team that they're trying to put out there as they kind of rebuild it after 3 consecutive four-win programs, and I think you got to go back to 2018 the last time FIU finished with a winning record. So kind of a blank slate moment, I'd imagine, right here for a new coaching staff.
Yeah, but a lot of excitement. And I think it's the most excitement there's been around the program since, I want to say, that 2018, 2019, those years. So there's a lot of excitement. And Coach Simmons made it very clear, like, this is a retool, not really a rebuild. And he brought in the talent to make that happen. He brought, you keep your quarterback, Kewan Jenkins, you keep running back KJ Owens, you keep a lot of returners too, for the most part. So it really helps that was the case. And he also brought in guys who are going to play right away. A lot of guys from the power conference level that are coming back to the group of 5, or even group of 5 transfers that want to come back and play in their home state. So it really helps that was the case. And I think the vision is clear. He's going to recruit South Florida heavily, and he already did that in this last recruiting class. I think it was only 2 guys that weren't from South Florida or Florida. They were from Georgia, so not too far. And that's the case with the next recruiting class too. It's already 20 players committed. I think only 1 or 2 of them are from Georgia. So it shows that they're going to recruit Florida heavily, and they're also going to recruit the state of Georgia as well. And I mean, only 1 recruit from last year was from Texas, for example, and Jackson Verdugo, the tight end from College Station. So it shows that they want to recruit South Florida. They want to make sure that they keep the best talent at home, and they're going to give an opportunity to the guys, and that's something else. And that's a great recruiting pitch if you're Willie. We saw a couple freshmen play last week. He says he feels good about 10 to 11 of his receivers, and we saw a couple of those guys as freshmen. Tyson Carter, Amari Isaac, Kenny Williams, they all played. So, and those were all freshmen who were running it with the first team during camp. So it shows, that there's a lifeblood here in South Florida, and that's one thing that the last staff did a good job of, but I don't think they reached the potential that I think, the AD Scott Carr and the rest of that staff was really looking for. And I think Willie Simmons is going to do a good job of that, but he wants to win. And he says that his plan is to take this team to the CUSA championship game the first year and hopefully host that game at Pitbull Stadium. So I think it's a good opportunity. I think this is the right guy for the job. Never had a losing season as a head coach. Obviously, we'll see if that remains to be the case in year 1 for him, but he's off to a good start. He's got the fan base going, and there's a lot of excitement for what Willie Simmons wants to do. And I think the vision for him is a lot clearer than it may have been a couple of years back with this program.
I understand that FIU is definitely working with several new pieces going into the transfer portal, freshmen, but the mainstay in the lineup, and you referenced it, is Jenkins at quarterback, a guy who has got, almost 5,000 passing yards under his belt at this point. I think maybe more than that. He was named Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year in the preseason. So tell us a little bit about why a quarterback like this could give FIU a fighting chance in a matchup like this.
Yeah, he's a pretty smart quarterback. I think when you look at him from his freshman year up until now, the decision-making is night and day, a lot better, and still needs to improve. But he also got a lot bigger. I think he came into FIU like at 175, and he's over 200 pounds right now. So arm strength is something that has really improved for him as well. And he's the leader of this team. Willie Simmons has said that multiple times. He's the leader of the program. He's the face of the program. I mean, come from Miami Central, where he never lost. He went undefeated his whole time when he was at Miami Central, 3 state championships over there. So it's a good guy to have, a good background, and it's a guy who's going to bring out a lot of fans. And on top of that, it's just good decision making. I think that's the biggest thing with Kewan is just improving on that. Made some really nice decisions in that Bethune-Cookman game, either a shovel pass to the side to get positive yardage, or him taking himself and run. And I think a big part of his game that isn't really spoken of is his feet. I mean, he's a good mobile quarterback that's going to move. Wouldn't go as far to say he's dual threat, but he moves well and he spreads the ball. And even though he's had 2 1,000-yard receivers that have broken the school record for most yards in a single receiving yards in a single season the last 2 years, I still think he spreads the ball quite a bit. He finds his targets. And I think under this new offense, which will include a lot more tight end usage, catching the ball instead of just being an extra blocker, I think he's going to find himself with a lot more opportunities there. So Kewan's definitely going to give his team a chance. He's played against the SEC, the Big Ten last year, and now he gets to play against probably the best team he will ever play at FIU. So definitely a great opportunity for him to go out there. And he says he's looking to shock the world. We'll see if that's the case. But definitely a great opportunity for him, and he is definitely the best player on this FIU roster.
Yeah, it'll be the biggest challenge of his career against the defense, but it's also probably the biggest spotlight of his career as he deals with, going into Beaver Stadium, 106,000 and the national eyes that will be on the number 2 team in the country. Big step last year for Jenkins. He went from 58% completion to 62%. He went from 11 touchdowns and 11 interceptions to 22 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He was also a lot cleaner, finished games with a lot less dirt on his pads. He was sacked 37 times back in 2023. Last year, sacked 15 times. And so when you look around him, I know that the rushing attack was the story in game 1. Jenkins had a couple short rushing touchdowns, but like you said, we're not going to be going into this game viewing him as a major threat with his legs. He can buy time, but I don't think we're looking at 50, 60, 70 kind of yards. So what is the deal with the rush attack? I'd imagine FIU's formula is going to involve long possessions, keeping Penn State's offense off the field. That's going to require some chain movers, some solid running. So what are we looking at from a rush attack perspective with FIU?
Yeah, and I'm not going to say it's to the level of Penn State, but FIU feels great about 3 of their running backs. They see it as 1A, 1B, 1C. All 3 of them are starters in their eyes, and honestly, they could be starters at a lot of programs. They have Keyshawn Owens, who is one of the returners on the offense, which he broke out for 2 touchdowns last week against Bethune. He's the guy. They were very high on him when they brought him back. They believe this is an NFL prospect. That's how high they see someone like Owens. He's a big dude, 6'2", 200-something pounds, like 220 pounds. Like, they like him a lot. And he's going to be a guy who's just going to run right down the middle. He's 1 yard away from 1,000 career rushing yards. He's at 999. So assuming Penn State's defense gives him 1 yard, I think that'll be the case, and he will get that achievement. Then you have Georgia Tech transfer Anthony Carey, who got quite a bit of run with the Yellow Jackets last year, but comes to FIU, already put up a career high, 49 rushing yards and a touchdown in that Bethune game. Was also used quite a bit in the passing game as well, so I'm curious to see if that remains to be the case. And Willie Simmons did note that he will be getting a lot more run this week. And then Devontae Lyons, he's a redshirt freshman, played in the final 4 games of the season last year, was the only FIU running back to have a 100-yard game last year. So that just shows you, night and day how much better that situation is on the run game. And those are 3 guys who all scored a touchdown. Keyshawn with 2, Carey and Lyons with 1. So those are 3 guys who they're going to rely on quite a bit. Lyons probably the fastest of the 3. So, and then obviously Owens is probably the biggest, strongest of the 3. But Carey's a guy who's going to give you a lot of options and is a guy who I think really could run through whatever it may be. So it's 3 good rushing options, and they give a little bit of run to their other guys like Jordan Clemens last year. You have Sterling Joseph, who's one of the was the highest rated freshman acquired by FIU through the recruiting class last season, or going into this season. So I'm curious to see they've got 4 games to use, and we'll see if this is one of them, but they feel good about 3 of their running backs, and since the spring, they've been saying it's 1A, 1B, 1C, and I think they'll live and die by that, and it'll be all 3 of those guys getting quite a bit of reps against Penn State.
Yeah, we know all about the co-starter conversation at running back here after recent seasons, and that continues into 2025. Across the field, defensively, where are the playmakers, the potential game wreckers who could flip momentum? And that's going to be required, I'd imagine, multiple times, of course, across the course of this game is momentum-changing plays from FIU to keep Penn State on its toes. Who are the players capable of delivering that on defense?
Yeah, it starts with Brian Blades, right? And I know James Franklin noted him first out of the defense. Like, this is a guy who's been with the program for now 4 years. This is his final year with the team. Didn't play the first 2 years a lot due to injuries and obviously redshirting him. But outside of that, the last few years have been great for Brian Blades. They believe if there's anyone on the team that could potentially be drafted, they think it's him. And he was one of the best coverage corners according to Pro Football Focus last season. At one point, he was the number 1 rated corner per PFF early in the season. So they believe he could replicate that and do even better. And he kind of had a little bit of a down year last season. When you look at his 2023 to his 2024, certainly some dip in stats and numbers, but I think they believe he could get back to that 2023 version. And he was only one of, I think, 8 Conference USA players last season to have a pick 6 in the conference. So certainly, a small stat there, but I think he could definitely be a little bit more of a ball hawk. So I'm assuming maybe Traver Pena is going to be seeing a little bit of Brian Blades this season. Keegan Davis, another player who's returning. I think he's the only returner on the defensive line coming back to FIU, only starter returning there. So He had a big season last season, all career highs for him. Didn't play a lot his first couple seasons at FIU. Did get into games, but just not a lot. This last season really broke out for them. That's one of the edge rushers. Then on the other side, you have Kenton Simmons, a JUCO transfer who is probably the biggest of that defensive line out of the two edge rushers at least. Big dude, 200-something pounds, 6'5". Like, this is a guy who's going to really fit in. When you look at him and the Penn State guys, he'll probably be the one that fits in the most. So I'm looking at those two. FIU's done a really good job of developing linebackers throughout the last couple of seasons. We saw Travion Barnes, who ended up being the Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year, going to Baylor. Before that, you had Donovan Manuel, Reggie Peterson, two guys who surpassed 100 total tackles. They bring in Johnny Chaney Jr., who's a Colorado transfer, but was with Willie Simmons, and now current linebackers coach Ryan Smith at FAMU, Florida A&M. And he joins FIU now, had a forced fumble in his first game. Then next to him is Percy Courtney Jr., who's one of the returners. He had one start last season, but played quite a bit regardless. And he had one of the sacks for FIU. So I think this defense is certainly the positive part of this team. I think is the part where you feel most confident. You felt most confident with them going into the season. They stopped the run pretty well. Defensive line was certainly a big issue going into the season. Definitely proved that they're able to stop the run, at least a team like Bethune-Cookman. But again, I would say you have to take that with a grain of salt. But a lot bigger, a lot stronger than they were in years past. So definitely going to be a tough challenge stopping Allen and Singleton there. So we'll see that. We'll see what they do. And I know, Penn State, not that they struggled to run the ball last game, but certainly not to the expectation I'm sure you guys wanted to see or anyone wanted to see. So FIU will certainly be a tough challenge, I would assume. But I think they'll definitely have their way with them at certain points in the game.
Before we get to your prediction, I just want to offer you a chance to throw out any X factor parts of this game that you see, whether it's special teams, some guys we haven't talked about yet, but tapping into your knowledge on FIU, what are those potential X factors?
Yeah, first thing I'm going to look at is the return game. Sequan Jean-Pierre was the Conference USA preseason special teams player of the year. Came off a pretty rough game, probably his worst at FIU. In that week one game, had a muffed punt. He is the punt returner and kick returner for FIU. Only did the kick returns last year because he had Dean Patterson do the punt returns. But this season, it'll be Jean-Pierre doing both of those, and he's a solid returner. I mean, he's going to get you yardage. He's going to put you in good field position. Another guy I'm going to look at on the special team side of things is Trey Wilhoit. He was an All-American FCS punter just a couple years ago, and he only had 2 punts. Probably we'll see him more than 2 times this upcoming game, but he really did flip the field. A 51-yard punt the first time, 52 the second time. So certainly a guy who's going to boot the ball quite a bit. And I'm looking at the receivers. I think this is an FIU team that has quite a bit of receivers that they feel good about. Alex Perry, a Hawaii transfer, 6'5", 210 pounds, is a guy who's going to really go up and get it. FIU really hasn't had a guy like that come into their program, a guy who's long, big, could really make big plays, explosive plays. And then they have a lot of speed. And I think one name that I think a lot of Penn State fans are going to look at is Samaj Demps. He's a really small dude, 5'7", 170 pounds, but he finished second with the second most receiving yards for this FIU team last week against Bethune-Cookman. So it's a name that I'm really looking at. And, it's like, all right, like it's a kind of a gadget player. Could see him in the backfield, could see him on the slot, could see him wide out. And they really think this is a player who could really be, the replacement for Eric Rivers, a guy who's going to really give you those explosive plays. And he had a solid game, was used quite a bit last season, but more in, like sweep plays or whatever it may have been. So it was really predictable when he was on the field. I think that won't be the case this season. They're using him a lot more, ran a lot with the first team. So just a couple aspects that I'm really looking at in FIU's game.
You've mentioned the name Eric Rivers again a couple times, and I think our audience may be like, why do I know that name? He was one of those receivers who entered the transfer portal last offseason that we initially were like, could Penn State be in the mix? Is this going to be a guy for Penn State? Obviously, Penn State found other transfer receivers, but he was coming off of a season almost 1,200 receiving yards. I think you said he broke program records last year, 12 touchdowns. He has now moved on to Georgia Tech to finish out his college career. Let's finish with you here by asking about your forecast for this game. If this one is contentious into the third, fourth quarter, what happened? And if this one gets away from FIU, what happened? And what's your final score prediction?
Yeah, this is still a game in the third quarter. I'd be pretty stunned, but I wouldn't be totally surprised with just the way that this coaching staff goes about their business. And they really believe that this is a team that could go up against anyone. And I would be stunned, honestly. Honestly, just how it is. It's a the number 2 team in the country versus an unranked FIU team that somehow received the vote in the AP coaches poll yesterday. So
we were wondering off air if James Franklin may have cast that vote just to give them.
I will tell you that's what FIU thought that was the case, but I am aware who was the vote. Just can't say. But
okay.
yes. But look, FIU must have stopped the run pretty well against Allen and Singleton to really get to that point in the third quarter where, hey, we have a game. Or FIU really made some explosive plays and got into the red zone a couple times, the first couple quarters. And I know Nevada struggled to do that quite a bit. So they had their moments. They gave a lot of turnovers. FIU hopes to limit the turnover game. They were looking at the Nevada film. They were looking at some Ohio State film as well against Penn State last season is what they noted. And they were just saying a lot of silly turnovers from the opposing team against Penn State that they really can't afford to have because that'll set up a touchdown. I believe there was a pick thrown to a defensive lineman that ended up being a touchdown or got really good field position. A couple issues on special teams as well for Nevada. So they're looking at those and they're saying if we limit those, we're going to have a ball game. And if they got away, unfortunately, it's, it kind of expected, right? I mean, this is a Penn State team with 2,000-yard rushers, a quarterback that is projected to be the number 1 overall pick or even a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And you just got to tip your cap to them and say you played better. But FIU is going to collect their paycheck regardless and move right on to Shula Bowl week against FAU. So I think this will be a close game throughout the first maybe quarter or two. And after that, I do think Penn State will begin to run away with it. But I'm kind of looking at a similar score to that Nevada game. Maybe FIU scores just a bit more than Nevada. I know Nevada did have a touchdown towards the end. I think FIU may be able to slip in 1 or 2. Just looking at kind of the non-con slate for Penn State, I do think FIU is probably the toughest of the 3. So we'll see what the case is. I'm excited to watch, but definitely think Penn State will get away with the win.
It doesn't have to be your official score that you put out this week, but can you give us a score? We'd like to get our opponents on the record.
I said 55 to 14. Penn State will win it.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. Kevin Burrell, check out his FIU coverage on his Substack. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoy the game from where you are. I wish we had you up here in Happy Valley. Join us in Beaver Stadium. But good luck the rest of the way with your season. It could be a Conference USA title contender. So have fun with your coverage.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good stuff from Kevin. Before him, you heard from our recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso, who always gets the job done. Check him out at Lions247.com. Check out our post-practice coverage on Wednesday evening into Thursday morning at Lions247 as well. We'll have practice notebooks on offense and defense, photo gallery from across the field, video highlights package from across the field as well, and plenty more coming from conversations with James Franklin, a variety of players. I've got a story up on Wednesday morning I'd encourage you to check out about Cam Wallace and Andrew Rappelier making their comebacks together in the season opener. They were roommates as freshmen. They spent a lot of time rehabbing alongside each other last year after serious injuries and then showed flashes in the fourth quarter, particularly against Nevada. So got a lot of storylines going right now. We'll do our best to get to them here on the podcast. Whatever we can't, you'll find it over at Lions247.com. We'll be back with a Game 2 preview episode later this week. Mark and Daniel will hop on board with me again. We'll talk about our players to watch, our practice takeaways, and ultimately our score predictions for this matchup. For now, stepping aside, thanks as always for listening or watching. I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.